energy extraction, taking, and more kind of an energy connection. This is a very unscientific way of saying free energy, 0 point energy, which is you going down to 0 Kelvin and playing around with that and whether you can get energy from that. And they call it free energy because you put a little amount of energy into the device to extract an enormous amount of energy. And that's where the savings come in. Right now we extract 1 kilojoule of energy to get 40 kilojoules from a barrel of oil. We extract 1 kilojoule of energy to get 2 or 3 from the tar sands of Canada. That's where the problem's coming in. That's where the price inflation is going to come in. That's where the trouble's going to come in. Not only do we have ecological destruction from the tar sands in Canada, but we also have a very low return on energy. And if we want a high return on energy, we're going to have to think outside of the box. We're going to have to look at the history of experiments that have been done since Tesla in the early 1900s through now. It's in arrested development. That should kind of wake us up. If it's in arrested development, when everything else has been progressing, and you just have these kind of garage, back of the door kind of, right now, the current free energy stuff is in my opinion, it's not viable at this point. It's not commercially viable. It's not economically viable at this point. People who are working with it are trying, but there's a chance and a very high likelihood, because corporations have done this in the past, that maybe there were free energy devices that were produced and they were bought out by competition. The people, the inventors, given a great deal of money, enough to sell it to them, and they're black shelved. So that the current, energy corporations, the current and other corporations who might be interested in buying it could continue doing what they're doing. You can, look in the, there's a lot of kind of research being done into this. I think the best person that I found so far is Wade Frazier on Project Avalon, and then Brian O'Leary is another good one. And Brian O'Leary he is a deceased, died in 2010, but he was an astronaut, did not actually go into any of the missions, but he was scheduled for the mission to Mars in the 1970s before that was kind of shuttled due to the Vietnam War and rising inflation. But he's involved in kind of the Mars project, kind of at the ground level. And he was also in Princeton, PhD, and he's a pretty intelligent guy. So there's a lot of points that you can look at, a lot of points of evidence that you can see, there must be a black hole in the middle of it. The thing is, we can't really point this black hole, but if you want, in this black hole is that there were successful free energy prototypes that have been bought out, and that exist. That's kind of the black hole. What we can see around it is evidence of it. And I think if we look closely enough, we can see enough evidence around that black hole to say that there's a high likelihood that there was a black hole. We'll never know for sure. We may know for sure, hopefully we will, but at this point we don't. What we can go on is our inspiration. And our inspiration is to expand into the universe, connect more deeply with ourselves, with the earth, with life on this earth, and with other human beings, and with life in the galaxy, whatever that is. And so if we want to do that, we can't do that with current means of energy extraction, solar cells, nuclear, fusion. We need to, which, there's really not any viable fusion thing. That's still kind of an experimental stage, but that's just not the way to go. Fusion may be one of the opportunities, because there is a high return on energy extracted, energy input, high return on energy input on fusion. Small amount of energy gives you a large amount of energy extracted. And so that's why that may be put forth by Skunkworks. But obviously the progress on that is extremely slow, and that should also raised some questions on the arrested development of even that Skunk Works fusion reactor. And we should question, why are things going so slowly? I think we all sense that at some level we're at an arrested development, and our technological advances, the advances that we're making, are really kind of built on major advances that have been made. We haven't really made any major advances, we're just making minor advances on the major advances that have been made. And I think right now we need to have kind of a second order paradigm shift on how we relate to the world, and that is to just, one, try to come up with free energy devices or 0-point Kelvin devices. We don't know the physics behind this, but a lot of our inventions were invented without knowing the physics behind it first. We just knew that they work, and I think that's the route we have to take with free energy. Just try something, see that it works, we'll figure out the physics later. There's so much skepticism, on anything beyond the current set of science at this point of time, that it's really maybe not worth to push that. Right now, it's just really should focus on getting new forms of energy out there. That's the only solution. Else we're going to have these psychological pressures of fear, scarcity, scarcity that's increasing as our resources dry up, as climate change impacts us to a greater degree, as our farms dry up, as our aquifers break down, as cities flood. It's just one climate disaster after another. And we can just continue just to say, well, it's not affecting me. That's a common human response. It was a response in Hitler's Germany. Well, I'm not a communist. I'm not a gay person. I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. I'm not a Jew, so I'm just fine. And soon they came even after the Lutheran priest, Bonhoeffer, and some other dissident priests and ministers and other people who normally weren't the first to be targeted. And so that's just something to kind of keep in mind, that it's part of human nature to kind of see all this disaster around us and not have much of an oomph to do too much. We might be outraged, we might be upset about it, but there's not much oomph to do much else, because we're stuck in fear. We're stuck in a survival mode. We're scrambling, working longer hours, having to do more, having to be smarter, having to be brighter, and there's just not, that all that fear, anxiety, depression, that has an impact on our mental abilities, our abilities to think creatively, our abilities to think outside of the box, our abilities to be happy, and our abilities to live an inspired life. Instead of living an inspired life, we're living a life that is according to the rules of the game. How can I make myself be a better business person? How can I make myself be, have the skills, from K through university, have the skills that are needed to be successful? And those skills, are not aligned with a lot of us. A lot of us think differently than the ways we're taught. A lot of us don't learn well and have to struggle. I'm one of those people. I had to spend about 3 times as many hours to write the same paper that somebody else who had a harder time grasping concepts, had a harder time from a conceptual level, but could write much easier than I did, and get higher marks for it. Even though when it came to the complicated concepts that we talked in class, I could talk about them and handle them a lot better than him. Well, that just shows that we have different abilities, different strengths, and that the current system of education isn't well suited to us. But that current system of education has a lot of pressures. They have pressures to have high rankings, just like corporations. Have a pressure to have high visibility and high demand, same with universities. And this really limits the amount of possibilities that are available, and it limits the amount of options that are available to us. So those who want to live an inspired life have to live in the margins. And thankfully to us, the United States and Europe and some other countries of the world, and those who are better off in other countries of the world, we can do that, but we do that in a very minimalist way. We do that in a very marginal way, because we won't be making a lot of money. And a lot of the inventors, writers, academics started that way. They would, work at a bar. I mean, in the 20th century, some would work as a waiter or work at a bar or do something just so they could have a roof over their head and enough food on the table to do their work. And that goes all the way back to the Renaissance, where they would have patrons and whatnot. But obviously, that shows the need for energy to be available for people to be creative, for people to expand. And if the energy goes down, the available energy goes down, the amount of social pressure goes up, the amount of bifurcation of wealth into the hands of a very few, and with leaving the rest of us without, increases. But as with nature, the few, whatever species it is, the few can only take so much before everything falls apart. They can only extract so much from the surrounding environment before the environment can't support the few who are taking it from them. And they know that. The NSA has, you've probably seen maybe photos on the internet or on the webs of, these kind of cages that have been constructed 15, 20 years ago by the NSA to kind of round people up, and cages, and perhaps there were encampments too. I don't quite remember. It's been a while since I've seen or kind of delved into this, but there are disaster plans by the NSA that are in place that are just, they have disaster plans for everything, and one of them is kind of the results of the way we're behaving, which is take the money and run, which is the motto of the Trump administration. Take the money and run. And I gotta be, I'm happy because he's showing how the system, it's time for the system to be over, is basically what Trump is saying. What Trump is doing and saying is the system's over. And we keep on saying, no, we just gotta, show up, bang the doors of our congressmen, feet on the pavement, march, protest and stuff. Yeah, that will always have an impact on what they do. And on top of that, it's, again, easy to topple this government if we have enough people who are willing to do it. All it is really a heart-driven thing. Once our heart and minds are kind of aligned in a certain direction, everything topples. It's really easy. Vietnam is a perfect example of that. The hearts and minds of the people of Vietnam were the people who fed them, who took care of them, who educated them, and those happened to be the communists at the time. They preferred them because they helped them, they loved them, and they supported them. They didn't prefer, this American force that was napalming them and bombing them and stuff like that, because we didn't want Vietnam to be an independent country, because an independent country meant that it would be more expensive for us to get the resources we need. We wanted a country with a compliant government, like the government of Suharto in Indonesia, and other dictators like Pinochet that we put up in Chile. We wanted a compliant government because it's easier for us to do business and cheaper for us to get that 30% of the world's resources that we need to sustain the lifestyle of the 5% that's the United States. So, in saying that, I don't know how explicitly that calculus played into it, but I know that we considered large parts of the theater of the world after World War II to kind of be in our sphere of influence. And I know that business interests were behind that. We wanted to be able to do business there. Who wouldn't? But if you go too far down that route and become really greedy and rapacious with it, you can lead to supporting terrible people who will do your bidding. Terrible dictators, terrible governments, and you will support military action to create what we thought was a domino of communist governments. It wasn't a domino of communist governments back in the 1970s, it was a domino of independent governments. And it was also a domino of governments that showed that actually socialism in certain ways does work for the people. We really didn't want to show that. We wanted to show that democracy and capitalism was the way. And we didn't want to show that people could be well off and happy under an alternative method. Even if, it turns out in some instances, like the Soviet Union, it wasn't sustainable. But in other instances, there were benefits of it. And there might have been a desire for that not to be seen by the American public. But I think the overriding thing was business interests. You know, we wanted to be able to make good deals throughout the world. We didn't want to have